Welcome to the final defense of the College of Education here at Iscofsac Enrique Campus Research Center, November 10, 2021. Before we start, let me share to you a quote by Zara Neale Hurston. Research is a formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. To our panel of evaluator, headed by the chairman, Dr. Nicanor G. Pareño Jr., Dr. Genevieve B. Garrido, co-chairman, and the members, Dr. Jessica M. Marfil, Professor Remar T. Alarba, and instructor Rosel M. Yamed. Together with my co-researchers, Kit Rainier Amador and Rose Jean Balbaneda, I'm Gretchen Milamero with the guidance of our advisor, Dr. Mary Joy P. Douglas. This study will analyze the narrative of Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas using the gender approach. Today, children are growing up in a society where internet, television, video games, and movies are natural parts of their environment. It is clear that young people, to a certain degree, are influenced by television and movies. Children, in particular, are easily shaped by attitudes and impressions from their surroundings, thus especially vulnerable to discriminating or unrealistic message from films. To sum up, Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas are spectacular and highly praised animated films. They are good for both young and adults. They are cradles of rich history, sources of the life lessons, and good materials for entertainment. This study aimed to understand and analyze the narrative of the three classic animated films, namely Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas in the perspective of gender specifically. Its suit answers the following questions. First, how do the characters in Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas conform and defy the sociocultural expectations and gender rules in the setting and context of each story? Second, how the three animated films alike and differ from one another? Based on the preceding questions, the following assumptions were advanced. Mulan herself defies what are expected to her and woman and daughter. She tries to conform in these expectations, but she really lacks grace and pose. Meanwhile, Anastasia fits the traditional gender role throughout the film. She is portrayed as home-oriented, indecisive, and easily influenced and sensitive, which are qualities of traditional women. Pocahontas is the embodiment of female beauty. She looks and moves like a woman. In general, she is indeed a strong feminist character. The three animated films are likely the same in terms of qualities of the characters, themes, life lessons, decisions makings, and gender rules. They differ in terms of setting and the sociocultural context used. This chapter explores the theoretical perspectives that will be used in the research project. First, there will be an examination of some of the literary approaches used in the animated films. Under the gender approach, there is a discussion about gender rules and stereotypes and other concepts of feminism and masculinity. This study aimed to analyze the three animated films, namely Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas in the light of the established gender rules present in the narratives. It likewise aimed to determine their common features and differences in the terms of plot, settings, characters, decision-makings, themes, gender. In the study, the researchers will be using the gender approach to analyze each of the animated films and compare them according to their common features and differences in the perspective of gender. For the purposes of clarity and understanding, the following terms used in the study were defined: Anastasia, comparative, analysis, gender; Mulan, narrative, analysis; Pocahontas.
The materials of documents studied, the method of analysis used, and the guide followed in the narrative and comparative analysis of the films, materials, full-length films, and synopsis. The study has adopted a narrative and comparative analysis employing the method of gender approach. Narrative analysis makes some specific, clearly articulated point about the story being told. In this study, the researchers used the gender approach to narrative analysis in order to examine the gender issues and found in Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas. After which, there will be a comparative analysis of the three animated films based on selected criteria or grounds for comparison. In this study, Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas are analyzed in terms of plot, characters, settings, themes, decision-makings, and gender rules. Gender approach examines how men and women in the narrative conform and defy the established norms, socio-cultural expectation, and gender rules set by their society. It specifically focuses on the images and rules of women and how the film show women empowerment. At the analysis stage, the researchers follow the guide of the Writing Lab and the OWL or Purdue University. Describe the society of the narrative, identify the behavioral expectation exposed by the society, the characters, explain how the characters embody these traits conformity, explain how women's creativity is showed in the narrative.
Chapter 4 presents the findings for each research questions, as well as the discussions. The conformity and defiance of the characters to the gender roles and social-cultural expectations in the setting and context of the film. In Mulan, in terms of conformity, the characters in Mulan conforms the gender and social-cultural expectations shown in several scenes. The story took place in China during the Han Dynasty. Their society displays strong patriarchal indoctrination where males are considered superior than females, where they are expected to be submissive to males. In terms of defiance, the characters of Mulan also defy the expectations and gender roles that they are expected to follow in their society. Mulan does not meet the expectations of the society to her as a woman. The discussions in Mulan is set in China during the Han Dynasty. It can be speculated that the plot takes place between 206 BCE to 220 CE. The film does not mention exactly the year, hence the kind of society and culture is patriarchy. Chinese patriarchy refers to the history and prevalence of male dominance in Chinese society and culture. Meanwhile, in Anastasia, in terms of conformity, the characters in Anastasia conform the social-cultural expectations and gender roles set by the society in several scenes. The narrative of Anastasia is set in Russia and Paris between 1916 and 1926. Imperialism cares for territorial expansion, conquest, annexation of the defense of temporary losses, and new conquests. In terms of defiance, the characters in Anastasia, on the other hand, also defy the social-cultural expectations and gender roles in the society. The discussions are, Anastasia is set in Russia in 1916. Russia was an imperialist country during that period. The first and most important characteristic of the Russian Empire has always been the maximization of territorial expansion for the realization of economic and political interests as one of the most important principles of state policy. Meanwhile, in Pocahontas, in terms of conformity, the characters in Pocahontas conform to the social cultural expectations and gender roles by their society. Pocahontas is set in England in 1607, and the rest of the scenes are set in Northern America, particularly in Jamestown in the same year. In the film, European society is based on the notion of hierarchy. In terms of defiance, the characters of Pocahontas also defy some social cultural expectations and gender roles based on the context of the story. The discussions at the time of European invasion, Indian cultures differ greatly from their European counterparts in the ways that they govern themselves. As shown in the table, Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas are alike in the sense that they have complete elements of the plot: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. However, in terms of events, They have no similarities because each concept of the narrative is unique. As shown in the table, in terms of characters, Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas have many similarities in terms of characters. The protagonists in the three animated films, namely Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas, are all females. It could be noted that they are strong female lead character, and each one of them acts as a heroine of the film. They are adventurous, courageous, caring, and free-spirited. They also have strong attachment to their family. The antagonists, namely Shang-Chi of Mulan, Rasputin of Anastasia, and Ratcliffe of Pocahontas are all male and share the same characteristics. In terms of settings, Mulan comes from the Chinese tale The Ballad of Mulan. While the real-life Mulan was speculated to have lived during the Northern Wei dynasty, that is between 396 CE to 536 CE, her story was first transcribed in the 6th century. Meanwhile, Anastasia is a magical animated feature film partially based on the real-life history tragedy of the execution of the Imperial Army of the Romanovs in Russia in 1916, and the possibility of a lone survivor, the youngest daughter, Grand Duchess Anastasia. Pocahontas is also based on a real historic figure known as Matopa, but famously known as Pocahontas. Her encounter with the Captain John Smith and other English settlers is also a real historic account dated back in 1607 in Jamestown. The message of Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas has something to do with one's choices in life of who will he or she is going to be, and what will he or she is going to do. The world is complicated that anyone is afraid to commit mistakes and be hurt, so one decides to choose he or she thinks what is best, even if it defies social cultural norms or even family expectations. There are several similarities among gender roles in Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas, though they have different settings. Women roles and expected behaviors in the three films are still to take care of the family and do domestic jobs. These are some of the traditional views on women. Men, meanwhile, have the duty to protect and decide for their family as the head of the house.
The researchers employ this specific guide under each approaches to synthesize ideas to arrive with the answers for the three research questions. The most consistent finding shows that the established gender rules and socio-cultural expectations on men and women in the films Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas greatly depends on the setting and context of the narratives. Woman empowerment is one of the key concepts in Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas. Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas have the same thematic concepts of choices, family, love, courage, and boldness. Mulan, Anastasia, and Pocahontas are cradles of rich history, sources of life lesson, and good materials for entertainment, as Mead and Cook says.
In the light of the findings of study and the conclusions drawn from them, the following are recommended for children and adults. They should realize that watching animated films does not only satisfy their yearning for entertainment, it also communicates information about the social structure, rich history, past and present views on people's role in the society, and most importantly, shapes attitudes about themselves, others, and the world. For parents, they can use animated films as modern means of teaching their children life's lesson, values, and rules. For students, they should realize that animated films are also called materials for literary analysis, especially when using gender approach. Since most animated films, gender roles are usually beneficial for the interpretation of the narrative when they are seen through motion pictures. For other researchers, they should be observant in doing literary analysis. They should be also skilled in analyzing and synthesizing pieces of information from literature to arrive at their findings.
Thank you everyone, and we are ready for your comments and suggestions.